But I guess if I had to go back to my 23-year-old self, I would encourage myself to be more comfortable in the discomfort of maybe not being so sure about what you want to do for your life.
You're listening to the MILF Podcast. This is the show where we talk about motherhood and sexuality with amazing women with fascinating stories to share on the joys of being a MILF. Now here's your host, the MILFiest MILF I know, Jennifer Tracy.
Hey guys, welcome back to the show. This is MILF Podcast, the show where we talk about motherhood, entrepreneurship, sexuality, and everything in between. I'm Jennifer Tracy, your host. So I wanted to tell you guys a story in two parts before I introduce today's guest, because this story is very personal, it's very vulnerable, and yet it's so important that I share it because it speaks to exactly why I have this podcast, exactly why I'm here, and everything I believe in about stories and women's voices and mental health. About 3 weeks ago, right before I interviewed April Uchitel, the CEO of Violet Grey, I was in a pole dancing class and I hit my head on the pole really hard, really, really hard. Now, I've been taking pole dancing class for 5 years and that's never happened, but it happened that day. And it was just one of those things had my eyes closed. I thought the pole was farther away from me than it was. I whipped my head around and bam, right, the front of my skull hit the pole dead on and immediately started to swell into an egg on my forehead. I was okay for the first 60 seconds, maybe 2 minutes. I finished my dance. I was done dancing. I said, I hit my head and there's a lump, and the teacher came over and felt the lump and she said, okay, let's get some ice. It was a really big lump. And then I started crying and all the women in the class circled around me. The class was over anyway. We all went out into the lobby. They laid me down on the sofa and I just was sobbing. I was sobbing and sobbing and sobbing. And so two things happened. I couldn't stop crying. Later, my friend Tara told me it was about 2 hours. I thought it was like 20 minutes, 30 minutes. She's like, no, honey, you were crying for like 2 hours. And I was crying. I was crying for all these different reasons. I was grieving over the loss of my marriage. I was grieving over the loss of my friend who took her life in October. It just was pouring out of me. And it was like the hit on the head, just like opened this, like a dam opening, you know? And so that's one thing that happened. The second thing that happened is that I was so embarrassed. Not just that I'd hit my head on a pole in a stripper pole in a pole dancing class, which is a very safe, loving, nurturing environment full of women. It's just a beautiful place where it's not about being exploitative. It's very loving and nurturing. But I was embarrassed. I was embarrassed of that. I was embarrassed that I was having these emotions and that people felt a desire to care for me. I felt like a terrible burden. I felt like, no, go, you have kids, you have appointments, go. And they said, no. People that had to go went, and we're staying because we want to stay. And you would do the same thing if it was one of us. And I knew at the core of me that that was right, because of course I would. I love helping whenever I can. And for me, being of service to another human being is like the lifeblood of my journey. And yet it was so hard for me to accept this love and this nurturing. And I just wanted to be invisible. So there was a big lesson in that for me. And then I had a huge egg on my head for I still have a lump, but it's much smaller now. But I had an egg for at least 10 days and a huge black eye on both eyes that just kept growing and changing. And it was dark and got darker. And then it was yellow and green. And it was really bad. And so I had this kind of story going along with it. And then a few days ago, I had this other experience. This is the second part of my story. And then I am going to introduce our guest today. I was having very severe suicidal ideation. For those of you who don't know what suicidal ideation is, It's when you are thinking about killing yourself, thinking about ending your life, thinking about wishing to be dead, that kind of thing. I haven't had this in many, 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 many years. And as I've shared on the show, I've been treated for depression since I was in my early 20s, and I was treated for postpartum depression 2 years after my son was born. So I'm very familiar with this feeling and these thoughts, and it came on extremely suddenly, and it scared me. But it also was very insidious and divisive. And what was happening was I was dissociating from myself. So I wasn't emotional about it at all. It was just very like I was making a grocery list in my head. After about 48 hours of this, I reached out to two people. I reached out to my therapist and I reached out to one of my best friends. And they came in immediately and brought me to the psychiatrist. And the psychiatrist said, okay, you are going to UCLA. I'm going to call ahead. They're going to examine your head and your neural functions to see about this lump on your head, even though at that point, it was 2 weeks old. And then they're going to give you a psych evaluation. And so my friend drove me to the ER and they checked me in and they asked me all these questions and they said, here's your scrubs. They were going to give me a gown, but thank God they didn't because I'm almost 6 feet tall and it would have been like I was practically naked and it was cold in there. So they found these scrubs. And they let me wear the scrubs, but they took my clothing. They took my personal effects. They went through my things, and I was completely compliant, but it was such a lesson in asking for help before it got, and everyone that was there, the nurses, the doctor that came and examined me, particularly the two psychiatrists that came and examined me, and evaluated me so that I could go home. They were detaining me. They said, we have to detain you because you said you've been having these thoughts. I said, absolutely. I want to be safe. I need to be stable. I have a child. Even though this is very vulnerable and it's scary and there's such a stigma around mental health and, psychiatry, I just think it's so important to share that it cannot be ignored when this is happening to you, no matter how small you think it is, no matter how insignificant, no matter how much of an inconvenience you think it might be to someone else. It'd be a lot more inconvenient if you kill yourself, if you harm yourself, if you harm someone else. These thoughts are not healthy thoughts. They're not your brain in its best normal function. And so accepting that help from my friends and my family, and even my ex-husband who came to watch our son so that I could go to the hospital, was really hard. Again, just as it was with the women circling around me. It was so hard to accept the help. And yet everyone kept saying, I'm so glad you reached out. I'm so glad you said something. I'm so glad we're here. And at the end of the day, after I was, a 12-hour ordeal and I was back home safe with several therapy appointments, psychiatry appointments lined up day after day, I'm on a path to getting better. And it is the 3-month mark of my friend taking her life. That's part of it. The head trauma was a big part of it. There's a lot of research that correlates, head injury with depression, particularly with people who have had a history of depression. So I think there are a lot of things were coalescing to have this incident happen. And the fact that it came on so quickly, it was really important to me to share this with you guys because I love you guys so much. And I also want to walk the talk because my whole thing is we have to share our stories. And this is a huge part of my story and it's current and I'm in it and I'm still in it and I'm still asking for help. And, we don't do this alone. We don't do this alone and we don't have to do it alone. I just want to offer that to you guys and just call somebody, call a friend, call 911, really, because there's nothing, it's not okay to be thinking those thoughts. I mean, it's okay that you're in the space that you're in, but you can get help and it will get better and it will change. And that was my experience. Anyway, at this point, I'm rambling, but it's a perfect segue because I'm going to introduce today's guest, Dr. Sarah Sarkis, who is a psychologist who lives in Hawaii. We talked so much about everything I just talked about. This was before this happened to me, but we talked about that. We talked about my friend's death. We talked about different diagnoses. We talked about general mental health. She's brilliant. She's funny. She's incredibly witty. I really love talking with Sarah, and I hope you guys enjoy my conversation with her. Thanks so much for listening. Hello, Dr. Sarah Sarkis. Am I saying your name correctly?
You are saying it correctly. Hi.
Hi. Thank you so much for being on the show, number one.
Thank you for having.
And you are in Hawaii. What island are you on?
I'm on Oahu.
You're on Oahu.
I'm not native to Hawaii.
You're you're from the East Coast?
Massachusetts. Yeah,
that's right. Sorry.
Yeah.
But so I just want to say at the start of this, so we're doing this online, obviously, because I'm in California. I don't know why I'm not hearing. We're having some technical difficulties. This happens to me often when I do the online. I can't see Sarah, and so she can see me, but I can't see her. So this is going to be a first for
As
me.
a shrink, it's a real metaphor, right? Because most of the patients in my life, right, and I know them and see them at a much deeper level than they see me. So this is staying within the metaphor of my wheelhouse.
Oh, I like that. Say that one more time. You see them much deeper, right? Because it's focused on that.
Right. Exactly. If you go to a shrink and you end up knowing the shrink better than they know you and you know yourself,
they're not doing their job. Get your money back.
Yeah, exactly.
Totally. So you're from Massachusetts. I went to BU, by the way.
Oh, nice. Terriers. Yeah. Love it.
Yeah. So you grew up in freezing cold weather. And what was that like? What was the childhood like in Boston or outside Boston?
Outside Boston. I lived like 35 minutes sort of southwest of the city.
Okay.
In a town called Westwood. Anybody out there listening from the East Coast? And yeah, it was very cold. But I come from a big family, so I'm the youngest of 6. And so for probably reasons of simplicity, we were not like a skiing family. We were a warm weather family. So on vacations, we always went to warm weather places, mostly Florida. And that's probably where I fell in love with the beach.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, and I have first cousins who were born and raised in Hawaii, which is how I ended up. And we all went to college together at Georgetown. And so the first time I came to Hawaii, I was a freshman at Georgetown, and my cousin took me home with her. And I was like, what is happening to my world right now?
Yeah. So how quickly after you finished college did you get to Hawaii?
Oh, decades. Okay. I never even, although every time I came here, I would think to myself, like, why aren't you living here? Mm-hmm. But I was, in hot pursuit. I was super focused in my 20s on I was getting my master's and then my doctorate. And so I really stuck to what was I just lived wherever I was going to get the opportunity to study next. And then when I was 37, I was married. I had my child really almost on a whim. It just, an opportunity availed itself, particularly to my husband, for a job. And we were on vacation here in February, and late February on the Big Island. And then he saw this job. He's like, I think I could be competitive for this. And meanwhile, the scene, I couldn't have written it better. We were landing at the Kona airport, and I put my hand on his leg. I'm like, listen, just this once, can you not go into fantasy land and tell me that we're going to move to Hawaii? Let's just try to embrace the now and be on vacation. I give him this whole new age spiel. 5 weeks later, we were living on Oahu.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. That's a true story.
That's incredible. How old was your child? You have a boy or a girl?
A boy, Luke.
Luke. Oh, Wow. So you guys moved to Hawaii 5 weeks later because he was little and you didn't have to take him out of school. But what about your
Exactly.
profession and your business and did you have
I've always had, ever
plans?
since I went through all my training and did my postdoc, and I was pretty clear during my graduate training what I thought I wanted to do. So I had that. I had a private practice partly that worked with people like you and me, just like I have now. So I guess
Yeah.
in the industry, we'd call it a practice with sort of high functioning neurotics. And, that's the best we can be. And
That's
I
me, all
also,
right.
yeah, me too. And then I had a small forensic practice where I worked like with a company on that, at a company, where I did like evaluations for court ordered matters. So it could be, serious stuff. It could be family disputes, but they had teams of psychologists that would
Sure.
write these evaluations. So basically, to answer your question, when it came time to being able to say yes to this adventure, I was self-employed and I just closed my practice and moved to Oahu and replicated my private practice in this part of the country.
And you had a toddler.
I had a 2-year-old. Yeah.
I mean, that's
I know.
pretty astounding. So, and I'm jealous. I'm having a jealous moment, which I have to say is rare because I have a relationship to Hawaii. So my parents bought a condo there in the 90s and we'd always vacation on Maui. And then they had a house there part of the time. I'm from Denver, so I grew up in a sort of cold climate, nothing like Massachusetts, and I always thought, oh, I'll end up there at some point and then they sold it and they moved here. So they're closer to me, which is great. We live in California, but I miss it. I haven't been in a long time. And I love that you built a life there because there is something magical about the islands and something very healing, and you're in a healing practice. So you have a toddler, you're married, you move house, you move everything, you build a new practice, boom. Then what happens?
Yeah. So it actually, and Hawaii I agree with you completely. And Maui in particular has a very kind of supernatural feeling to how green it is. And there's parts of Maui that remind me of Colorado with those big, tall forests and trees. Yeah.
Yes.
I really love Maui. And every island has its own unique vibe.
Yeah.
All of that is true. But, in the interest of being truthful, the move was, like a lot of things, I think, in life, it had a lot of grit to it and a lot that wasn't romantic. And, life got in the way. I moved. My mom got sick. She died within 10 months. So it was an adjustment. And what I think but all of those things now, 9 years later, have shaped me in such beautiful ways that I wouldn't change a thing. But I will say, one of the things that I got moving to Hawaii, and I realized how ignorant I was of this before, was that I really experienced culture shock.
Yes.
I moved from a place that is so different, right down to the way that the culture that I grew up in communicates to the way that this beautiful culture communicates. It's so different. And so I just had probably like a 2 to 3 year period where, I was building my practice and having a great time. But there was a subtext that I was like, what have I done to my life?
Right.
Right.
Total fish out of water.
Totally a fish out of water.
Yeah.
And, and I have family here and deep roots and stuff that anchored me. So I can really appreciate now people who move and relocate to foreign lands that are just and like often it's out of your country, right? I still had the safety and protection of like, oh, I'm in America.
Right.
So, but yeah, I mean, then we started building a life here slowly, but surely we sort of, put it together. And in terms of my practice, it took about a year to be full. But I had
nothing.
patients. No, it was nothing. I had patients like I gave myself 10 weeks. I said, when you land, you have 10 weeks to like get the home together, get my son settled. And then you have to get out there and you have to start networking. You have to start to look for an office. So, within 4 months of being here, I had a small handful of patients.
That's impressive. And I'm sorry, you said you're the youngest of 6?
Yeah, youngest of 6.
So do you attribute a lot of your moxie to that of like you had to do shit or you were going to be forgotten?
Totally. I mean, I think, the vast majority of my personality probably is owed to the fact that I was born the youngest of 6. And by the way, all of my siblings are like strong, dynamic personalities. There are no wallflowers in the crew. Yeah. So
you really had to stake your claim.
I can thank them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
And being from Boston,
Yes.
there's a certain type of straightforwardness and
I love it. I loved Boston.
Yeah.
I miss it. Do you miss it?
Now, so it's so funny to think about. That's such a good question. So, okay, let's be clear. I still don't miss an ounce of winter.
No.
And essentially the weather is the thing that keeps me from contemplating that maybe there could be another chapter there. I'm like, you can't change that. And it's just so miserable. And now seeing what it's like to be outdoors and in nature 360 days of the year.
It's heaven.
I don't think I can go back, right?
Yeah.
But there's tons I miss about Boston now. Yeah, it's improved my relationship with Boston. Moving improved my relationship with Boston. I miss the sports. I miss the food. I miss like certain parts of downtown Boston with like the cobblestone streets and that sort of like old world kind of charm. And then I really miss the frankness.
Yeah, it is refreshing. It's a very, I don't know if you use the word straightforward, but it does feel like they just get right to it. And I really appreciate that in a different way than New Yorkers.
Yes.
Wow. And do you visit there at all anymore? Or you don't have any you still have family there?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Most of my family lives back east. And I get back. I try to do, I don't think since living here, we've ever gone longer than 2 years. And like the last couple of years, I've gone every year.
Wow.
Yeah.
And that's a long flight. What is that? A 12-hour flight?
Yeah, it's 12 hours. But once you're 5 hours from the nearest landmass, something shifts inside your body about distance. Like something like now flying to California, I'm like, well, it's just California.
Right. It's nothing.
But like in Boston, I would have been like, oh my God, it's all the way across the country.
Right.
And so it is a long trip, but you just know that that's the price of living here and you kind of just cope with it.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'll break it up with a stop in Los Angeles.
Right.
I'll stay a night or two with some friends in LA.
Right. Let me know when you do. We'll go to lunch.
I will. I will do that for sure.
Really, please.
I'm going to take you up on that.
Yeah, please. Because I just had another guest who came from New York, Brooke Christian, and we had lunch on Tuesday. We went to the Ivy on Robertson, and it was just so cool to meet her in person and chat in private, which was nice too.
Yeah.
So I would love that.
I will do that for sure.
Please do. So you're living in paradise. You have a toddler. You now have a practice, a full-fledged practice. Tell me about your practice, because it's very interesting the way that your website is set up and what you've told me that you do. And it's just really interesting. So go. How did it start? Like, so you go back to that place where you are.
So, I mean, I guess I would say about my practice now, and I'm sure it will be different in 5 years because it's so different than where it was 5 years ago. But now I work a lot with like functional medicines and naturopathic doctors. And I for sure still work within the mainstream allopathic medical community because that's unavoidable when you're running, a complex private practice that sees a full spectrum of psychological
just
needs.
For the listeners and myself, can you define allopathic?
Like any Western, sort of standard Western practice.
Okay.
And but I have increasingly found myself, I would say probably 10 years ago, so even before I moved here, I had really started to move deeper and deeper in a direction of realizing that if we continue to isolate each like subspecialty, like the heart person takes care of the heart, and so the shrink takes care of the head, that my patients were feeling, they might have some movement on the needle, but it wasn't what my type A wanted for them. I didn't want them to have the absence of feeling crappy. I want them to have the presence of feeling well. And so I increasingly just found, and I was doing it in my own life. I had my own stuff going on that I was really trying to figure out, like, okay, what's going to be a solution-based approach here that's going to help me feel better from, my own particular stuff. So I found functional medicine. And in particular, probably the first person I found was Mark Hyman. And then that sent me in all these other directions. So I started to talk about it with my clients. So now, fast forward 10 years later, and I really feel privileged. I have a private practice that most of my patients sort of are operating in this world now. They understand the notion that how you interact with your own relationship with yourself, one of the most valuable efforts you can make toward feeling well, and that it falls in line with feeding yourself nourishing food, that it falls in line with getting 8 hours of sleep, and all these sort of simple but actually kind of rare things these days.
Yeah.
And so, that's really kind of how it evolved. And then now my practice, I have a lot of like executives that I work with here in the community, and people who are, well, it's actually men that taught me this principle. I decided a year and a half ago that my practice at the time was 70% women and 30% men. And it had been that way since the start, right? And I got 3 brothers. I can jive with boys. I got a son. I mean, I'm raising, right? Yes. So I basically thought to myself, what if you tried to switch that ratio over this next year? And you had 70% men and 30% women. So over the year, when I would get vacancies, I would just wait for a male to call, and I would, see more and more men. So now what I've realized is that a lot of men come in and they talk about their sense of wellness through this language of performance. And once I got that, I was like, oh, that's my in, because they're actually willing to do the emotional introspection if they know there's going to be a return on investment that's sort of tangible. It's just how their brain is wired.
Yeah.
Now my practice sort of has this other realm that it's evolved into, which is also super fun. And I've gotten some of these guys to be super interested in, like, what you feed your brain contributes to your mood. They are not disconnected concepts. So it's been great.
So say more about that. What you feed your brain. What do you mean by that? Because you're not talking about smoothies. You're talking about actually content that you put in your eyeballs and your ears, right?
I'm talking about both.
Okay.
Yes. So I actually am talking about, like, I try to have all my patients meet with some kind of nutritionist. It can be wrapped up in your primary care person if they are interested in this world. What I was finding a lot of times was that when I would go to Western doctors, and they were helpful, but when I would try to talk about like food and stuff, like what can I eat, there really wasn't much feedback. And I guess what I'm learning now from like listening more and more to people like Mark Hyman is that they don't actually teach that at medical school. Wow. And so I think for a while he was trying to get it back into the medical school curriculum.
There's no nutrition, or maybe there's like a day, but there's not
maybe there's a day, maybe there's like a CE you have to take, but there's not like an ongoing discussion about the ways in which food can participate in keeping you well. And
why do you think that is? I'm sorry to interrupt you. Why do you think that is? Why do you think that's absent in traditional Western, basically in traditional Western medicine, but especially in the medical schooling?
I mean, I'm no expert and I didn't go to med school, but I'm never short of opinions. So we can, this should be taken with
and I'm asking, so
exactly, a serious grain of salt. But I assume that it also reflects that, first of all, medicine is based in figuring out pathology. And that's an important, like my mother died of colon cancer. And, she was somebody who was going to what we'd call integrative or complementary or alternative doctors, but never went to a Western doctor. And lo and behold, nobody found the cancer. So seeking for pathology is something that I do believe has a lot of value. But I crave it being balanced with an understanding that you have to pay equal investment in trying to keep the vessel from getting sick.
Prevention.
Yes. Yeah. And so I think probably that's one thing that, first of all, I think Western medicine is pathology based and, there's real merit for that. And the second is that I think that there is a relationship between this focused on pathology and then having to find something to fix the pathology. So that can come in lots of forms, but the easiest target in that bullseye is there is, for me, an uncomfortable relationship between the pharmaceutical industries and how frequent the first line of approach is a prescription.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, as a psychologist, the way that I would see it is I would have 24, 25, 26-year-olds coming in, and they'd be on at least an antidepressant for sure. They'd probably have an anti-anxiety medication like a benzodiazepine for PRN use.
What does that mean, PRN use?
As needed.
Oh, okay.
And then there'd maybe also be some sort of low-grade stimulant in there because the antidepressants cause lethargy and all kinds of other things, right? And so for me, what I was seeing was just so many people coming in that I couldn't even really get like a baseline understanding of who they were. Like, who are you at baseline? And there, I have to say now I'm almost 17 years with a private practice or working within the private practice setting. And, there are mental illnesses that are very real and they cannot be acupunctured away and they can't, right? But that's not the vast majority of them.
Right. Well, I just want to point out, first of all, thank you for saying that, for everything you just said. But what you just said resonates so deeply with me because I just lost my best friend in the world to bipolar. She had been treated for many, many years successfully. And long story short, she ended up ending her life this past October after going off her meds because she and her husband wanted to have a child. And I think that it's so important. There's room for all of that, right? There's room for all of the, I'm very into Eastern and holistic and all of that. But sometimes there are these disorders that the person really needs to be on medication.
I completely agree. And I'm so sorry to hear about your friend.
Thank you.
It's awful. And it changes the lives of everybody that orbited in somebody's sphere who dies by suicide.
Yeah.
And, so I'm glad that I had the opportunity to say that because I often don't want to come across as though I have some idealized version of the human condition.
Right.
I don't. But I know that the vast majority of times there are things that we can do for ourselves
Yes, absolutely.
That make a huge difference. Now, bipolar is one of those there's a sort of a short list of scenarios where I would essentially require medication compliance in order to work on the case, because they are so volatile and so susceptible to suicide. And major suicidal depression is one of them, and bipolar is the other.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's something that, up until we know better, we just don't, either we don't have the science for it right now, or this is the best it's going to be. Yeah. Medication is really necessary in those cases.
Yeah. And I mean, I have had depression and anxiety my whole life. I'm also sober. I haven't had a drink or a drug in 20 years. So I know that is a piece of myself, like an addiction quality. But I had really bad postpartum depression after having had depression, like I said, off and on throughout my life. And I am currently still on 20 milligrams of Prozac per day. Mm-hmm. And it's just a very, it keeps the bottom from dropping out.
Totally.
But I also hear so often of none of my close friends, because many of my friends are sober also, but so many people just have Xanax, have Ambien. They just have all these things. I'm like, who is giving you guys all these drugs, and why? And so I also feel like, and I'm not even in the medical profession, I'm just, your average lady, but it feels like it's everywhere. And it's just like, who's giving you this? And also, who's supervising you after they've given you this?
Yeah, I mean, I'm so far removed from that world that I can only conjecture that there ain't a lot of supervision. Yeah. And, I can tell the difference when a client walks in who has conscientious psychiatric care. And I have clinicians here who there's a handful that over the years that I've really come to value their consultation when I'll have like a complex case where I'm like, maybe there is some sort of mood component here, or there may be, some suicidality. And when you find a gem like that, it's awesome, because there is, I'm writing this, my next essay will be this thing on epigenetics and neuroplasticity and what that means for the field of psychology. Yeah, so it's a really fun one. Thanks. And I was reading this statistic. I'll probably butcher it, but at least I'll have it footnoted in the blog. Americans are 5% of the world population, but they consume 66% of all the psychopharmaceuticals.
Oh my gosh.
Produced in the world.
Oh my God. So that is horrifying.
Yeah. So, you're feeling that you'll listen to your friends and be like, where is this coming from? How are they getting this? I don't think you're crazy. I don't have I have that statistic, and I have what I see coming in and out of my office.
Yeah.
I know that one of the biggest risks on high school campuses right now is Adderall.
Oh, yes. I've heard that as well.
Yeah. I mean, it's cocaine, basically. It's like one molecular salt away from it, or some silliness.
Yeah.
Yeah. And again, I've seen some cases. I always want to be moderate, because by nature, I am not I try to be a person of science, really try to take a case and look at it objectively. But, and I have seen cases like, if my child was failing out of school secondary to inattention and impulsivity,
sure,
I can't say I wouldn't try it either. But I don't think that the vast majority of people that are being prescribed it are failing. I think it's often prescribed long before other things could be explored. And
also, there's probably, I'm sorry to interrupt you, just because there's a resource issue here as well.
Totally.
So, for example, my son, I'm very, very blessed, and my ex-husband and I are blessed, but my child was diagnosed with dyslexia and something called central auditory processing disorder, which is, you know what that is, but for our listeners, it's where you have trouble hearing things if there's any kind of noise. That's the short version of what it is. So in a normal classroom, he was in this darling little private school, like a little cottage. It looked like Harry Potter school. And there were 24 kids and 2 teachers, and he could not focus. He couldn't concentrate. We had the means and the resources to go to a nutritionist, to go to a psychologist, to get him fully assessed, to then discover he needed to be in a specialized school where there's 5 or 6 kids in a classroom and special teachers. But we could afford that. When I went to this International Dyslexia Convention last year, it was great to meet so many parents from all different socioeconomic levels and all different cultures who were struggling. And this one woman, I sat next to her, and she said, she was so sweet and humble and gracious. And she just told me, not in a martyr sort of way, but about what she has to do on a daily basis to fight with the public school system to get her son the support he needs in his public school. And I just thought, that's your life. Like that. I couldn't do any of this. I couldn't do the podcast. I couldn't do any of this. It would all be about that. And management. So I get where if someone is, in a different place, socioeconomically, culturally, racially, ethnic, all of those differences, right? That if the doctor said, here, your kid's not paying attention, to have him take this pill, you're going to say yes. You're going to say, okay, thank you. I can't deal with any of that shit, and I don't have the money, and I don't have the time. So my heart aches, and yet that is maybe one piece, just based on my tiny slice of experience.
It's a huge piece of it. Yeah, I think it's a huge piece of it, and I like the way you said it. That it's a issue of resources. It's true. It's that the current system is not designed to make these kinds of pursuits available to people who don't have disposable income. Right. Unfortunately, we have a system where what is covered, and what is not is your responsibility. And that's easier said than done for the vast majority of families out there. Yeah, it is. It's a shame, and it is heartbreaking.
And same for, someone with a mental disorder. I mean, the tenting here in Los Angeles, the homeless tenting problem just breaks my heart every day. And I want to pull my hair out because I don't know what I can personally do about it, except maybe talk about it on this show and raise awareness and donate money as much as I can. But it's most of those people I know from personal experience are, not all, but many of those people have mental disorders or addictions, and there's not support for them. And I know I don't want to veer off too far because I want to get back to you, but it's just an interesting transgression on the topic of medication and, big pharmacy, or is that what it's called? Big pharmacy, big pharmaca, whatever.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm getting off track.
No.
But so you have this integrative practice where it sounds like if I came to you, let's say I'm Bill, and I come to you and I'm having horrible anxiety, and I work in 60 hours a week at a job, and I've been brought to you for therapy, and I'm on 3 different kinds of medication from Dr. John Doe in Kansas. What would your this is just a crazy sketch scenario that you can't probably give me a full answer because you'd have to do it like 6 weeks of diagnosis. I don't know. But what would you do? Would you say you have to see a nutritionist? You have to see,
So the first thing I would do is just have them in for an intake, and, really just try to spend, the appointments are about 50 minutes long. We would spend the whole hour being just really curious about what it is that made Bill come to me at this moment of time. And I just try to understand that context. The other stuff has to come later when you've really built the intimacy of a therapeutic relationship and that you've laid some groundwork in the therapeutic process so that they could safely try to see if they can tweak their medications, right? And I would send them off to somebody else to do that component of it. And then, if they get really interested in it, and I have yet to have that many people. It must be a small handful of people that haven't been really curious. And that's not because I'm the best salesman. It's because people are dying for information.
Yeah.
They're dying for resources to try to better.
They want to fucking feel better.
Yeah, they just want to fucking feel better. Thank you. Exactly. So, then I'll refer them out. And then the therapeutic part, the place where I really work is if I had to summarize myself, although I really loathe this task, but I would say that the sweet spot that I think I have a talent for is that, so we all have these behaviors we do, right? And they are sort of fixed in our wiring. And there's this whole host of them that are conscious to us. And that's in the first appointment, what the person talks to me about. They talk to me about everything they're conscious of. And that's valuable. It provides us a starting space. And it's safe. The person's telling you, these are the things I feel safe to talk to you about.
Right.
So you start there. But fairly soon, within 6 to 10 sessions, you're going to start to see, or I start to see, the flip side of those conscious behaviors, which are the unconscious behaviors and the unconscious fuel sources that contribute to all these, that contributes to a vast majority of how you respond to the world. And yet you're completely unaware that that's what's operating. So when we really get into the deeper work of therapy, the way that I work in my particular training now is that we try to move things from the unconscious to the conscious. And all of that is in the effort that you, as you deeply know yourself, for men, you will perform better. You will feel better. You will have more energy. You will feel more grounded in what your, vision is for your career. So that's the spectrum in which a lot of the therapy unrolls.
Mm-hmm. And what about for women?
Very similar arc points of what is it that drives us to, oh my God, I love that.
My dog just pushed his nose into frame.
I'm so happy. I secretly I have a cat who I wanted to make a cameo, but being very cat-like, she isn't.
Of course.
Yeah.
Of course.
Yeah. I forget what I was saying. That was so
awesome.
Women.
Sorry.
Yeah. So the women, we all have, we are all more human than otherwise, right? Gender mediates a lot, but we are all more human than otherwise. So there's a lot that overlaps. What I would say is that I find processing styles are different, and the way that we experience and express the various stuff that people come in to digest. I'll say this about diagnoses. My practice follows the same as the national norms. The vast majority of who's coming into my office endorse 2 psychiatric symptoms, depression and anxiety. Those are global terms. There's lots of subcategories underneath them. But underneath all those diagnoses, to me, are just diagnoses. They're really just sort of a code you use to get the health insurance to pay for it. They don't actually guide much, as you have to really deeply know the person that's sitting across from you.
Right. Wow. Okay. So now, can you tell me about the padded room?
Oh, my blog.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love the name.
Yeah. Well, I've heard people get very offended by the name.
Really?
I know, but it's my Boston humor. I can't help it. I'm dark and stormy.
You're on the MILF podcast, so you're talking to the right girl.
Exactly. Exactly. You can relate.
Yeah.
So I liked the padded room because it's literally a virtual room. So for me, it was the irony. I started that maybe 4 years ago now, but I didn't really turn my attention to it until 2 years ago. That's an example of anybody who's listening and has something in their mind that they think they're just like, oh, this is just going to be like a silly hobby. And I don't want to create the time. create the time. It's the most rewarding. I mean, I love seeing my patients and it's fabulous, right? But in terms of like new challenges and a new vehicle for expression, the padded room is the most fun I have had since, honest to God, I don't remember when. And I'm talking, it must have been my youth.
That's so great. Well, you're still in your youth, honey. You're still in your youth. So why do you think it is that it is the most fun you've had in as long as you can remember?
Yeah, that's such a good question. Okay, so growing up, I was always somebody who, like, I wasn't like a great student. I was athletic, and that sort of, I got to kind of coast on that. But I was always a good writer. Like, I just had somewhere just my brain chemistry, words. Now, of course, now they fail me, but words come easily to me, right?
Yeah.
So for years throughout high school and stuff, and then like sophomore year, I became a much
Gemini?
more
What's your birthday?
Aquarius.
Oh, okay. You must have some Gemini in there, though.
Maybe it's tousled in.
Yeah.
So I did writing, and at college, I was an English major and I was a psych major. But when I got out of college, I just had this feeling like I have to find a career that I can support myself. And I was always interested.
Writer isn't at the top of that list.
Oh God, I was so terrified of the notion that I would be like unstructured and thrown into the world to like, I envied the tough, like gritty women that were leaving Georgetown who were like going to New York City to hoof it. And I was just like, oh my God, were I to be
underrated. Underrated. I should have done what you did. I mean, I did that. I was one of those.
I know. I love it. Why do you say it's underrated?
For me, well, here, to echo what you said about your own life, the hardships that I faced and the mirror of my own self-worth that I had to finally face up to over a long stretch of time, knocking on the doors, trying to get acting jobs, trying to, do all that stuff. It broke me down in a way that now I'm super grateful for everything that happened and I wouldn't change it. However, I think there's a lot to be said, and it just wasn't in my makeup. It wasn't what I wanted to pursue, but there's a lot to be said for pursuing something that does have a structure, that does have an end game, that does have something where you can say, hey, I have this certificate and it, I can serve this part of the public with this skill.
Yeah. I mean, it's so funny you're saying that. That's what my mom always said. Like, I would say to my mom, I'd be like, well, what if I don't want to be a psychologist forever? She's like, Sarah, you've got to stop at the forever. You'll have it and nobody can ever take it from you. And I just thought that was like, it's echoing the sentiment that you're saying. So yeah, I appreciate that. But I always admired women like you who were just like out there, like badass, like I'll pay the bills the way that I have to. And so, yeah, I mean, I just went and and I'm glad I did, I enjoy my practice, but I guess if I had to go back to my 23-year-old self, I would encourage myself to be more comfortable in the discomfort of maybe not being so sure about what you want to do for your life.
Yeah.
I think I could have really benefited from that, but that's all wasted on youth now.
Oh, yeah, we don't know. I mean, we don't know. Talk about anxiety. The anxiety I used to have in my 20s over nothing. Like, I was single. I had no children. I could sleep till 9 a.m. Now I'm like, you idiot. Like, what were you even worried about? But you don't know when you're young.
But there's a beauty, the thing too that I love working with 20-somethings so much, especially women, or young women. There's a righteousness in your 20s. You just are so sure that what you're sure of, and it takes you, it really, for most of us, we can ride that to our 30s where you start to get a little more grounded, and there is a beauty to it. But yeah, I do look back at that life and think like, oh my God, why did you, like, what was happening? What was happening?
Why was this boy who didn't love you. It was unrequited love. Why was this so important? Or why did you think your ass was big? Like, why did you? I look at pictures of myself. I'm like, my God, I was a knockout. What was I thinking?
I know.
But
yeah. Yeah. So the padded room has been my ode. Basically, once my mother died, I sort of had this, I don't know. I just, as people who have lost their mother, you have this unanchoring. And I was very unmoored. And I just thought to myself, and I hadn't written, other than the academic work of my master's and my doctorate, I hadn't written in a decade. I mean, I literally hadn't sat down and written a single solitary meaningful piece. I was just doing life. I was working. So I decided to do that. And now I love it so much. I mean, in many ways, all of my efforts, like with coming and meeting this wider circle of people like you and other people along the way that have been willing to talk with me, is because I started to try to research like what it takes nowadays to write a book. And one of the things I continue to come up against is this realization. Everybody I speak to is like, you have to have a platform. You have to have a platform. And for the people out there that don't know code for platform, they mean an audience. Yeah. And when they mean audience, they mean you have to have a social media presence. Yeah. And, I'm a social, outgoing person, but I'm basically introverted. I like to write I would be somebody who could sit home and write 8 hours a day and see no other human beings perfectly comfortably. Mm-hmm. And so that's when, and that was in 2007, maybe 2016. So that's when I said to myself, like, okay, so this is the game that you have to play. And if you keep saying you want to play it, then get busy playing it. Yeah. And that's when I really started, I was like, okay, I'm going to produce at least 2 pieces a month. I'm going to contact people to talk. I'm going to start to risk putting myself out there because who knows where it will take me. Yeah. And I know that doing nothing will take me nowhere.
Wow. I love your moxie. And I just want to say that you did that with me. I think you had to email me
many times,
2 or 3 times.
Yeah, totally.
And then I was like, oh my God, of course. I don't even remember why I didn't respond the first time. It certainly wasn't a personal thing. And I also want to just say that to people out there, when you contact someone, and I do this too, because I have to get guests and I interview people. I try to get people that may never email me back, may never, I don't know this woman, but sometimes when I do it like you did 2 or 3 times, and just persistent. And, I have this thing, I'd like to offer it to you. I'm really interested in what you're doing. And it works. And that's what happened with you. It was like the third, and then I felt like a dick because I didn't respond the first time.
No, not at all. You were great and gracious and so authentic in it. I think you wrote, of course, yes, exclamation point.
Yeah, because I was so excited. And it was because you were so consistent. And I appreciated that moxie that I said, this woman's got some interesting stuff. And I clicked on your stuff and I was like, oh my God, and I thought she's writing a book. She's writing a book. She's got to be writing a book. Nice. And, but I also want to just say to you as a fellow woman and a fellow writer, hello, there's 2 other furry beings in this interview now.
They've multiplied.
That yes, you need a platform, and yes, you need all of those things. And most importantly, you need content with heart that comes from a authentic origin of need to tell story. And you have that so beautifully, and you do it beautifully, and you've done it beautifully today. And so,
that's so nice. You can't see me because we had IT issues, but I'm smiling. I mean, that means so much to me, because that's really what I really want, that if there's people that jive with what I have to say and how I say it, to connect, because I think that's what matters. I think, showing up and being present and authentic and available to, share whatever it is that I have to say that might help others, then
exactly.
That seems like a good gig to me.
Yeah. And it spurs them on to, my little dog looks like he just did something naughty. I don't know what it is. I'm going to find out later.
You are.
It spurs them on to take those risks in their own lives, whatever it is. If it's writing something, if it's interviewing for that job they think they can't get. Like, to me, that's the magic of this. And that's why I do this podcast, is to just keep spreading that, like the domino effect,
Yeah, it's great. And what you said earlier, I don't want it to get lost in the kind accolades, because I want your audience to really hear what you said. That I think what I said to you in the first email is I said, I spent all of 2018 inoculating myself against rejection. So I have to keep reaching out. And honestly, if you can learn to inoculate yourself against it's just our ego that gets a little, oh, I'm not good enough. Oh, I wasn't. Oh, she didn't like it. Oh, I don't want to bother her. Oh, I don't want to, whatever it is. If you can just push right past that and keep going, it isn't personal. Like, this is a perfect example where I probably sent the original email and you were busy with something else. Could have been
right after my friend just died.
Exactly.
Something like that.
Exactly. And that just keep doing it. Like I said to you in one other exchange that we had off podcast, I said to you something like, one of my only talents is relentlessness. And it's true. I just am somebody who I am willing to keep going when all evidence, statistically speaking, would tell me to quit.
Yeah. And listen, the worst thing, and I'm saying this out there for people who are listening and wanting to take a risk or afraid to take a risk. Honestly, the worst thing that can happen is that the person says, no, thank you.
Yes.
Maybe they'll be rude to you, but probably not.
I haven't come across one rude person. And I can tell you from 2016, I started applying to writers' residencies, trying to get into different kinds of podcasts, trying to every blog I was originally, before I had an audience on my blog that feels substantial to get some traction. Before that, when it was like, 100 people were reading the essay, I would send everything to all these psych blogs. And first of all, most of the time you're just going to hear crickets. So, they're really appreciative when they do respond with a no. And I have gotten the vast majority of 2016, almost all of 2017, and 2018 mid-year, the vibe started to shift for me. I started to get emails back where I was like, wait a second, did they just say yes? But so, 2.5 years of basically just hundreds and hundreds of no's a year. That's all it was. And every time it got easier and easier. And now I don't even bat an eyelash. My husband started joking. He's just the best. He's so positive and he understands networking so well, which is something I came to the game sort of late to. He said to me, you should consider when they respond to you with no, that's a win. You now have their email.
Yeah.
He's like that. They took the time to say no. So you can, in a year or in 6 months, or when you get another piece that you feel really might move the needle, you can say, hey, how about this one? And it's so true. I have a number of podcasts that I am in, that I stalk regularly. Yours is among them. I mean, I was so psyched when you responded. I remember calling my friend who's also a psychologist, and we do some seminars and stuff together. And I said to her, I was like, remember that podcast? She's like, oh, yeah, I don't need an introduction to it. I was filling her in. I was like, she responded.
Oh, that's so awesome.
Yeah. So it's been great.
Thank you so much. And I can't believe this, but we've already come to the time where I ask you the silly questions.
Okay.
But this has just been a delight. I mean, I could definitely go on talking to you for a much longer time.
We'll take it offline in LA sometime.
That's right.
In the next few months.
That's right. Let me know when you come out.
I will.
So I ask 3 questions of every guest, and then I go into a lightning round of questions.
Okay. The
first question is, what do you think about, Sarah, when you hear the word MILF?
Wisdom.
What's something you've changed your mind about recently?
Psychedelics.
Oh, say more. Are we talking ayahuasca?
No, I don't like throwing up. I don't want to throw up, and I don't want to be around people throwing up. So ayahuasca is sayonara.
Is that what it does? I don't even know.
It makes you throw up. But I hear it's transformative. I haven't decided whether, so I'll be 44 in a month. I feel like at 45, maybe a vision quest would be cool. There seems to be something great about that, but I haven't committed myself to it. But I will say, I have worked with somebody who became interested in microdosing, and she was a scientist herself. And so she experimented with it, and the journey with her surprised me in ways unexpected. And it made me really open my mind, no pun intended, to the idea that true microdosing may really hold therapeutic benefit for people who have struggled, in the cases that I see with depression.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay.
Okay.
How do you define success?
I define success as feeling as though my career has passion and purpose, and that I can support myself. It's important for me that I feel like I can support myself. And then in a global sense, success, I want to feel connected to myself. I want to feel that I deeply know myself, and therefore I can connect with others in the world.
Great answer. Okay, lightning round. Ocean or desert?
It's a Sophie's choice, but ocean.
Favorite junk food?
Pizza.
Movies or Broadway show?
Movies.
Daytime sex or nighttime sex?
Daytime.
Texting.
I'm too tired at night.
Texting or talking?
Well, I talk all day, so I text a lot with friends.
Yeah. Cat person or dog person?
Cat.
Have you ever worn a unitard?
I don't think so.
Shower or bathtub?
Shower. Barely ever bathtub.
Ice cream or chocolate?
Ice cream.
On a scale of 1 to 10, how good are you at ping pong?
5.
Most people answer 5. Isn't that weird?
Yeah.
I don't know. It's just, I think, because it's just like a good neutral, like, yeah. I could do it, but I'm not going to slay at it. You know?
Exactly. I'm not going to slay.
What's your biggest pet peeve?
Insincerity.
If you could push a button and it would create 10 years of world peace, but it would also place a 100-year ban on all beauty products, would you push it?
Okay, say that question again.
If you could push a button and it would create 10 years of world peace, but it would also place a 100-year ban on all beauty products, would you push it?
Okay, I am going to say no, but not because of the beauty products, but I don't know that I believe that struggle is necessary. It's a necessary stage in growth. And so I'm not somebody who is seeking utopia.
Great answer. Okay. Superpower choice: invisibility, ability to fly, or super strength?
No questions asked. I've known it since I was 5. Invisible.
Nice. And what would you do with it?
Lurk. Be a voyeur, just like I am in real life.
Would you rather have a penis where your tailbone is, or a third eye?
I have always wondered what it would feel like to be controlled by a penis, but I think at this point at 44, I'm going to say third eye.
What was the name of your first pet?
Governor.
What was the name of the street you grew up on? Grove
Street.
So your porn name is Governor Grove.
Love it.
That is is your porn star, is she English? Maybe? Governor.
No, I don't feel like I'm that refined. I feel like I would have been like a street whore.
No, but like she's Cockney, like she's.
Yeah, she could be. Yeah, I mean that, or I think I'd be like an old like Boston broad.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah,
that's it. I should have thought of that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my God, so good.
That's my alter ego.
I love it. I love it. Sarah, this was such a treat. Thank you so much for emailing me and contacting me. And I really enjoyed having you on the show. And I can't wait to share this episode with
This was
my
so
listeners.
fun. I'm so glad that I didn't take it personal and I persevered.
Me too.
It's awesome.
Me too. Thanks so much for listening, guys. I really hope you enjoyed my conversation with Sarah. Tune in next week for a new, fresh episode of MILF Podcast. Also, just a quick reminder, if for every iTunes review that you guys leave in the month of February, I'm going to be donating $25 to the organization called Lumos. They can be found at wearelumos.org. I'm really, really proud of the work that they're doing. Also founded by J.K. Rowling, another amazing mom I'd like to follow. And if you haven't already, go ahead and grab your free copy of 7 Habits of Baller MILFs on my website, milfpodcast.com. I'll be talking to you next week. Thank you guys so much for listening. Have a wonderful week.